Modern Pleasure answers the questions about sex that you've always wanted to ask but didn't.
Join me, Kim K, and our resident sexpert, Dr. Jenny Schuyler, as we dive deep into combos ranging from sexual intimacy and pleasure to eye-opening sexual revelations. Welcome to another edition of Modern Pleasure. I'm Kim K, along with Dr. Jenny Schuyler. And by the way, none of this would be happening if it wasn't for our sponsor, Adam and Eve. We thank them for being such a big supporter of this show. And boy, do they bring the fun into pleasure. And at a bargain right now, just for listening, visit adamandeve.com and you get 50% off plus free shipping when you use the promo code MODERN. That's 50% off an adventurous new toy or almost anything that will bring you pleasure, whether you're on your own or with your partner. But that's not all. You'll also get 3 bonus sexy items and 6 free movies for free just for being here today. But you have to check it out now to get that 50% off and all the fun free stuff as well. So adamandeve.com, code word modern, MODERN, save some cash and bring a little more pleasure into your life with Adam and Eve. And don't forget the free shipping. That's very important. It all starts with free shipping, right? adamandeve.com, code word modern at checkout, and you're good to go. Hi, Dr. Schuyler.
Hi, Kim. Good to be with you again.
I know. I kind of was hoping that maybe we could do a little recap since a lot of things have happened since our last conversation. And so if you listen to the last episode, and if you haven't, you should listen to all 3 episodes that we've already done because they're all very enlightening. But the last episode actually was a very interesting moment for me. And what's funny, and I had to think about this after we had our conversation, the topic really, I was kind of thinking before we started talking about it, man, how much information are we going to actually be able to get into an hour on this topic of Madonna Horror Complex, which was a fascinating subject, right? But what happened ended up actually being the topic of conversation at a dinner party over the weekend. So my poor husband, oh my gosh, my poor husband. But it was a very interesting conversation where Dr. Schuyler actually had me do this exercise that she uses on a lot of her patients. And I'm not going to even go into that. You have to listen to the episode to get the full effect. But ultimately, what happened after we did this exercise and after our podcast ended that day, I had this eye-opening moment, and I was ready to go into the house and like lay my husband down on the floor. I was ready. That never happens. And I actually did go into the house because I'm like, hey, honey, I think I would be really surprised, if I were him, if I came into the door and did that, right? But he was talking to a solar person who was in there trying to sell us solar, so it didn't happen, unfortunately for him. But what did happen was a really interesting conversation, and I kind of had to, tell George what had taken place in the conversation between you and I, which was not an easy thing to do. And it wasn't necessarily at first he's like, oh, wow. And then he went, wait a minute, it's on the podcast. And I'm like, yeah. And again, you're going to have to listen to really understand exactly what we're talking about. But I promise you, it's definitely worth it. Anyway, so George is going to be on the show with us today.
Excellent. Thank you, George.
And good for George. And today the topic is mismatched libidos, which is definitely something I've been, waiting to talk about because it's apparently it's not just a female topic in terms of somebody being interested in it, because also in this dinner party that we attended, when we talked about the podcast episodes and stuff, and when I said, hey, the next one is going to be Mismatched Libidos, the guys were more interested in this conversation than the women were.
Oh, yeah, because they want more sex.
See, and I'm looking at it in a completely different way. There you have it.
It's funny. I mean, I also want to debunk the myth that men have the higher sex drive because while biologically and physiologically that's generally the case, there are some men, certainly if it's two men, one man may have a higher sex drive than his male partner. And sometimes even in a heterosexual dynamic, especially with like Madonna Whore, for instance, a man may have a lower seeming sex drive than his female partner. That said, the general premise is in a heterosexual dynamic, men typically have the higher sex drive, and they're very excited about this topic because they'll hear me speak or come to me as a therapist and go, "You'll fix my wife, right? You'll fix her. You'll get
Mhm.
her libido back up." And then I have to debunk that one and say, "That I'm not a magic worker and nothing's wrong with her."
Yeah, right.
The issue is in the mismatch and how we find the compromise. But, the people who fall off of therapy are the ones that are like, fix my wife, she's broken, her libido's too low." And I have to say, "Sorry, that's not what we do here." And the more you perpetuate that narrative, you're on your way to divorce. And it's true, I actually see that. That they end up getting divorced because they are locked in that their wife is broken and her libido is too low.
And I can see where that would happen. Now, in the case of my relationship, and boy, I'm really feeling like I'm using me as an example, but it's the only one I have at the moment. Um, i- i- as I got older, and as you get a little bit more settled into a relationship, there's definitely a change, especially if you're going through any kind of hormonal changes. I mean, I'm sure there could be a number of reasons why a female libido starts to lower, but I also have friends who are my age who have a very high libido and who have gone through menopause, and I kinda scratch my head going, "Well, what's wrong with me then?" And that's, I think, where that comes in because you do have different, scenarios where you feel like you're not keeping up with the narrative, right? Especially when somebody who is your age is still really like, because I even brought it up to a friend of mine. I said, "Hey, you want to talk about mismatched libidos?" She goes, "Oh, I don't have that problem." What? What? What do you mean you don't have that problem? You should have that problem, right? If I have that problem. So yeah, it I think it runs the spectrum, right? There's a lot of different reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be interesting to talk to your female friends who feel like they don't have that problem, because sometimes there is a mismatch, but it's not a problem in the relationship because the higher desire partner, so maybe their husbands, don't make it a problem, right? They know, "Oh, my wife only likes to have sex," let's say she is a higher desire person and likes to have sex multiple times a week, but they don't reach out every single day, or they don't reach out even, multiple times a week. Maybe they know to reach out once or twice a week because they know that's what her excitement level is, and that they know that the space in between is actually the secret to foreplay. I'll say that again. It's when we don't invite. It's the space in between that's the secret to foreplay because it's the space that creates the mystery and the yearning and the space to actually feel your own desire and arousal without being smothered by the higher desire partner's energy.
That's
So it'd be
interesting that you
interesting
say
to
that
see
because
what they do.
my friend is that kind of very affectionate, very touchy-feely, very, you know, so that makes a lot of sense.
Mhm. So, yeah, I'd be curious what the husband is and isn't doing on his end. And because the mismatch libidos that I see now, obviously, I see dire cases because 'cause they're coming to me because they can't navigate it themselves, and that's where the mismatch is so dire that they can't navigate it themselves, or the mismatch has become enough of a mismatch that it creates a tension and a stress where the low desire person feels smothered and feels, the pull towards obligatory sex, and the
Mm.
higher desire partner feels undesirable altogether. And so we have to address those pieces rather than the frequency actually doesn't solve anything. Because if the higher desire partner still feels undesirable because she shows up, a few more times a week with more obligatory sex, it doesn't fix the felt sense that I am desired by my partner. Right? The issue is actually feeling desired by the partner. So, your female friend, for instance, she might be flirting with her husband most of the week, but they only have sex once or twice in a week. And it works for them because they have a lot of sensual energy in their relationship to make them both feel desired by the other. I don't know, I'm making up a whole story having no idea about this
Right,
person,
right,
but that's
right.
generally where the health of a sexual relationship lives.
So when we're talking about mismatched libidos, and again, I think we've figured out that there's a number of different ways that you can actually describe that, right? But what are the most common issues? I mean, what is the most common problem behind mismatched libidos?
It's basically the higher desire person wants more sex, typically to feel connection and to feel desired by their partner. And the lower desire partner is looking for connection not in sex. They're looking for connection emotionally, affectionally, intellectually, right? And the higher desire partner typically is sort of stuck in sex is the only place I know how to do connection. And so the more sex, obviously you need more sex to feel more connection. So the idea there is let's broaden how you are able to connect with your partner emotionally, intellectually, affectionally, socially, spiritually, right? There's a lot of different ways to connect with your partner so that sex isn't burdened with this singular place to find connection. So that's one of the main issues. And then we come back to obligation sex like we did last time in our session, and we have to talk about, you know, when the higher desire partner is putting that pressure on the lower person, they will say yes from a place of obligation. So helping that person find their authentic yes is key, but also having space to say no is key. Because if you don't have a no, your yes is inauthentic.
Mm,
You can't ever
gotcha.
trust that it's an actual yes, right? So the no is key, but also broadening what they do. A lot of these couples usually have one activity, intercourse. They usually don't have a lot of foreplay. They usually don't have a lot of playfulness. They usually don't have a lot of emotional connection and discussion, throughout the week and certainly right before sex to just kind of check in and where are you and how's your heart and how's your week and just really like deeply connecting to the person before we connect to just their genitals. So it's really teaching them all those components to help them get more on the same page.
And, based on my experience and the conversations that we've had over the weekend, I really did feel differently about that connection with my husband in terms of sexual, where I wasn't feeling pressured. But I was also very playful, and we had a great weekend, and I was a lot more, affectionate, I felt, and I guess we can ask him because he's gonna come on the show here in a little bit, but I felt more affectionate. I felt like I was not forcing it in any way. It really came naturally because of whatever I was it's just a mental thing, right? And I just felt very freeing, like, I wasn't you had just said something earlier about that obligatory sex, feeling where you kind of check out in a way, you don't have that feeling, that emotional connection, that you would get when you're, in a space of playfulness, and that arousal kinda happens naturally. So I can totally see where you're coming from in that perspective. And again, bringing it all back to the brain, right? And
Mm.
that mental state of mind is really significant. And what's funny is that I told my it's so weird because usually the weekends are our time, to have sex. And I
Mhm.
told my husband, I don't know if it was this morning or last night, and I'm like, "We didn't have sex once this weekend." But I actually feel pretty satisfied now. He probably is gonna say something different. that I feel pretty satisfied in my connection with my
Mhm.
husband as opposed to when we've had sex.
Mhm. I'd be curious what he says too. I know he's listening, but because it may be more satisfying to him, and let's check with him when he comes on, that he feels your desire for him and more authentically than even having sex. You'll get there. He can have an orgasm with his hand or with you, but like to feel your desire towards him is really exciting and sexy. And when I work with couples, when that actually gets registered, that's more important than having more sex. But I'll say you have 4 key ingredients, and what I like to do when couples have, like, a really good weekend or a really good week is go over the ingredients that worked well. It's sort of like remind yourself of these data points, write them down, and let's recreate them. And the data points I hear for you, Kim, are 1, you had more playfulness, which
Mhm.
we know is super helpful, right? Like, I don't know if you played poker or not or talked about it, but it sounds like you brought your playfulness.
Yeah.
2, it sounds like you had friends over, so you have social intimacy, and that can be really fun. Humans thrive in community and connection, so social intimacy really does lubricate us for our partner in a way. 3, you had some emotional intimacy. It sounds like you talked about the podcast, you talked about what you've learned, like you shared your inner landscape. And
Yes.
4, which I would say is almost the most important of all 4 of these, is, and you didn't sort of say it this way, but so correct me if I'm wrong, you took a lot of personal responsibility for your arousal and your desire, right? You were more affectionate with him. That's on you.
Yeah.
You brought up the conversations. That's on you. You looked at him in a different way. You went to him, even though he was talking to the solar guy, you went to him with that intention. That's on you. You took responsibility for your desire and arousal, and you pinged it at him, which feels empowering, right? When we
Yes.
take responsibility for our arousal, we feel empowered, and it's actually just more contagious in our own system, right? It just manifests more than going, I'm kind of dead. I hope my partner does foreplay for me nicely, but I'm just going to lay here and hope that that happens well. Versus like, no, I'm going to take the reins and take responsibility for my arousal, and it feels empowering and sexy.
Yeah, and I don't think I would have been in that position of I think I would have, woke up this morning with that guilt of, "Oh, I wonder, if he's, feeling a little neglected because I didn't, get into that place where we have sex on the weekends," and I didn't feel that way because I felt that there was a bigger connection between us, that didn't really require sex, although my intention was to have sex. I was there. It just for some reason, it just didn't happen, and I just wasn't thinking about it in that way. I was aroused, but not enough that I was really satisfied by the connection, and I really liked the connection that we were having. And so, like I said, I'm sure he might think differently, but that was kind of where I was at with it. So, I don't know.
Mhm.
Who knows? There's definitely something there to it. Again, you're listening to Modern Pleasure. Thank you for joining us. I'm with Dr. Jenny Schuyler, who, by the way, is fantastic. I've learned so much. I can't believe, I told I told George, I go, "I feel like I'm getting free sex therapy sessions," and in all honesty, I am, but, it wasn't intended to be that way, nobody thought I never thought in a million years that I was gonna be the one coming out with this revelation, and we've still got a lot of episodes to go, so we'll see, but we're definitely gonna be bringing in a lot more people to communicate with and go over, their experiences and their feelings, and it's not gonna be all about me, I promise, I promise.
Adam and Eve is not giving you 10% off and not 20% off or even 40%. Your discount is even bigger. AdamandEve.com is giving you a whopping 50% off. But why stop there? Use offer code
Modern.
and you'll also get 10 free gifts, like a sexy item for him, a special toy for her, and something you'll both enjoy, plus 6 free spicy movies and free shipping. So go to AdamandEve.com now for 50% off and more.
But, I would like to, maybe bring in, George if he's if he's ready. You think you're ready for him?
I'm ready for him.
Are you ready for him? All right, let's see.
You ready for us?
Is he ready for us? Welcome, my husband George, to the podcast. Hi, honey.
How are you two doing?
You look good.
Thanks.
So, were you able to hear our conversation?
Yes, I was.
Great. So George, I'm well. Thanks for asking.
Yes, Dr. Schuyler.
Tell me about how you felt this weekend and the connection, but no sex. Yeah. Where did you kind of shake out in the wash with all of that?
I felt confused at first because she definitely was a different person when she got done talking to you.
Mm-hmm.
I just heard the part about her having control and her own pleasure. So it was a little uncomfortable when she came into the house and was acting in a total different way that I'm not used to. So I even asked her, what do I say after that? Just to, and she said, don't say anything. So I went, oh, well, that's good to know. So I don't have to make any reactions. But no, the weekend was great.
So you said you were confused. How did it land for you? What did she come in saying or doing?
Well, when I was with the solar guy and she came in and I could tell that she was definitely flirting. And I had this gentleman here that I was talking to, and I was confused there at the beginning because that is not the norm of my wife, Harley, in general. I mean, maybe when we were younger, that was, because we've been married, 19 years now. But now as we get older, things have changed and everyone's on a little different path, I guess, when it comes that sexually. So yeah, so I was surprised, excited, definitely, and I was still kind of wondering what the heck is going on. It was confusing, but in a good way, not in a bad way. It's just I haven't seen that from her in a very long time.
Well, and I have to just
that,
I need to insert here because when he said that he didn't know how to respond, we've had that conversation before about that, a little bit too, I don't want to use the aggressive, but if I give anything, it's like, wow, let's do it. It gets very exciting. And we had that conversation about that subtlety, that part that says, just, back off a little bit and give me some space to feel empowered sexually. Right. And so we had that conversation previously. So when he said, so what do I do? And I said, you don't need to do anything. That's what he meant by that.
Gotcha. Good. Yeah. You're giving Kim the space to really feel the fullness of her arousal, of her desire. Let her full on flirt with you. And then if you just kind of like flirt a little bit back, but don't jump on it, right? Don't just, take her to the bedroom immediately. She gets to she's wondering now, oh, I get to flirt even more. I get to feel my energy even more and direct it towards you even more. And so this is part of how we recalibrate a mismatched libido, right? She needs the space to feel all that and to take the responsibility to generate it, right? So some of the conversation we had, sort of our sexy, salacious conversation, was reminding her of what she finds sexy in you. And then she's like, oh, where is he now?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. But I feel like, George, over the weekend, did you think that I continued that flirting, that affectionate, way that, did you feel what I was feeling in terms of that connection a little bit differently than normal?
I felt the love, if that's what you're saying. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, however you want to interpret it, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely felt that. I definitely saw the flirtiness for sure. But like I said, it was definitely confusing, only because I'm not used to that. It was there was a definite change this weekend, in a good way, most definitely.
That didn't result in sex,
No,
which is so weird, right?
So this isn't going to be aired anywhere, is it?
Yes.
Yes. Did you find yourself, George, not inviting her because you were sort of tentative with her new energy, or were you waiting for her? I'm curious about it sounds like you guys have sort of a Saturday contract of having sex, which by the way, I'll say is really good for couples when they approach Saturday with intention and sexy energy, not obligation, obviously, because then it's sort of like the reason I like a date on the calendar, I'll say this for mismatched libidos too, because it's really important for both partners to hear this. Having a date on the calendar allows for reliability for both partners. The higher desire partner has the reliability that they're going to have sexual contact. The lower desire partner has the reliability that there are days of the week that we don't have sexual contact. So there's sort of that liberation of like, yeah, well, if I walk around naked, I know it's not going to necessarily lead to sex. That said, when the energy does get more kicked up and there's more flirtatiousness and more sort of erotic energy deposits, and I'll talk about that in a moment, more spontaneous sex ends up happening because of that, because of the space in between. But generally, I like the sex date for the reliability for both partners.
Yeah, and I think, for the most part, it worked for us, but like the conversations that we've had in other episodes where I felt like it was something I had to do. I didn't feel like, I mean, I want to please my husband, but it wasn't, and he'd always be like, well, what about you? And I'm like, nah, I don't need it. That was kind of I'm good. And that didn't make him feel very good. Right. So this little idea of, well, it's the weekend. I know when George wakes up sometimes on a Saturday morning, he's like, it's Saturday morning, and God bless him. He does a great job of flirting with me in terms of, but what I know is it's not, for me, it's not just the flirting part. For me, this is going to end up with us having sex. And there isn't that idea of mystery, like, is it going to end up with sex or is it not? And I think for me, that is an important element that helps me to feel a little more empowered sexually and sensually for that matter too, is the not feeling like it has to end up in sex. Like you said, he would love for me to walk around the house naked, right, honey?
Yes.
But I know if I take off my clothes, sometimes I almost hurry to to not have him see me naked for fear he's going to be like, oh, come over here. Let me squeeze your boobs. You know what I mean? Because that's not what I want. That's what he probably thinks I want, but that's not what I want. I would like to be able to just walk around naked and have him be like, oh, okay, you look hot, and leave it at that and let me walk around naked and feel empowered. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious, if he squeezes your boobs, do you not like the sensation of that? Or are you worried if he squeezes my boobs, then we must have sex?
No, I think it's more like I'm just not in the mood for anybody to squeeze my boobs right now, you
Okay.
know?
How would you like him to touch you?
Well, I think that if I'm in the mood or if I'm feeling, sexy or flirty or aroused in any way, then he touches the way he touches me is great. It's when I'm not in that aroused sense or mood. But I will say that if any of that happened over the weekend, I don't think that I would have that same feeling. I think I have actually uh, had some very clear moments of what my role in this relationship is on a sexual level, just in the past few weeks that you and I have talked. And I I recognize this as that part of me that is giving myself permission to, feel objectified in that way that you described when we went through that exercise or when we talked a little bit more about what that feels like. And so I don't, I mean, I haven't walked around the house naked or he hasn't walked in on me changing my clothes yet, but I sense that the reaction from me would be a little bit different.
Yeah. You also said something really important. I'm gonna come back to how can he touch you? Because I'm sure he's sitting there being like, "How do I touch her?" George?
Yes, exactly that. Yes.
And this is a
Is
really
she gonna
important
bite me? Is she
right. And let me tell you why, because I bet there's a ton of listeners out here who have this same issue, which is I don't let my husband touch me at all because if I do, then he assumes it's a green light for sex. And so they end up becoming touchless marriages or touchless relationships because of that factor. And what I want to do is open the floodgates for as much touch as possible and a lot of diverse touch, affectionate touch, playful touch, erotic touch, sensual touch, and to really help couples differentiate those different kinds of touches. Because what you do is if you imagine little piggy banks, like think about your bank account, and you have a savings account and a checking account, like you're filling these up and you're not necessarily taking withdrawal yet. Right? You're
Mm.
just filling them up so you feel good. So when you do take a withdrawal, you're like, well, that's an easy withdrawal. I have plenty of money in my account. So with touch, and it's a really interesting thing you said, Kim, you're like, I don't, if he touches my breast and I'm in the mood, it's fine. But assume that you're not usually going to be in the mood because we don't walk around in the mood. And this is a huge piece to mismatched libidos that I'm going to speak about in terms of testosterone in a moment. But assume you're not in the mood because how many women say, I want to want, but I can't? And that's like the $1,000,000 question. Flablasterin is, all the pink Viagra kinds of things that have failed don't work because one, there's nothing wrong with our libido. So let me just say that that's sort of the main thing. But two, there isn't a magic pill that's going to uptick our libido. It's understanding how it works so that we can be our best advocate for it as a team and individually. And so we are, Rosemary Bassoon, a wonderful sex educator and therapist in the field, researcher, talked about spontaneous desire versus responsive desire. We respond to stimuli, right? We don't spontaneously get aroused. Right? Even men who have high testosterone, they're responding to something. They're responding to a memory. They're responding to someone walking down the street. They're responding to something they see on the screen. They're responding to lightly, touching their testicles as they're, in the shower, right? They're responding to something. And women are the same. We respond to a stimuli. The stimuli can be flirting. It could be affection, right? It could be a touch. So that's why I say, how can he touch you? Because if he touches you in the right way, right? Now we're working with responsive desire. You might go, oh, I feel myself kind of, that's an electric kind of touch, right? Grabbing the breast or slapping the butt is a very like football locker room type of touch, which I'll say that's how we teach boys how to touch each other growing up,
Yeah.
right? They don't learn how to do sensual touch. That's not allowed in our society, certainly not in the United States. You'll see it more in European countries where boys do hold hands and hug more than they do in the US. But
Oh,
the US
interesting.
does not do that.
Mm.
And so men then come into relationship and don't realize, oh, I got to learn how to do sensual touch to flirt. Like, what is it to come up and kiss the neck and then walk away and be mysterious? What is it to nibble
Mhm.
on the ear and then walk away and be mysterious? What is it to be like? And that's why I said this, right? The S of sensual, to sensually touch your breasts or sensually touch your low back and then walk away, which is different than I'm going to squeeze, right? I get it. I get the like wanting to squeeze luscious parts of the body. Like there's a yumminess to that too. And that's a different type of touch than the sensual flirt, right? The sensual, I'm coming in, I leave, that's my deposit, and I leave you wondering, but I've also turned on the responsive desire in your system. You'll be like, "Oh, George, where'd you go, George? You just kissed my neck so sensually," and then he disappears. And then he does that for a few more times, and you're like, and he's still not inviting me. Wow. Then your fires get to start to be stoked.
That resonates with me really well. I like that subtle approach as opposed to, let's go all in. And it's interesting, and maybe George can speak to this too. But when it comes to touching, like even this morning, I like to play around with him a little bit. It's fun, and he likes it. But then when he comes over and just goes right for it, with fingering me or whatever, it's like it's too much. I can't do that. Um, but if he were to just lightly caress my hair or my shoulder or just show me that sensual affection in that way, that's a much better response from me, for sure, than a genital thing.
Yeah, and George, I don't know how you feel on this. I usually say this to heterosexual couples. We have a really different lived experience of our bodies and our sexual response. And so the two main distinctions are testosterone and genital speed, if you will. So let me just say something on testosterone, right? Men typically have way more testosterone in their bodies, right? Whether it's natural or you infuse it there, there is a lot more. And so, if you were to do your numbers, my guess is you would probably be somewhere. Do you know your numbers,
Uh,
George?
no.
No.
Um, Healthy, no, I mean, the range of healthy is actually like 300 to 1,200. I think 1,200, you're gonna be like rage men, that's way too high. You're gonna be out of control. And I think 300 though on the normal spectrum is a little low, unless maybe you're in your late 80s. So my desire for men is somewhere, but even these are free testosterone levels, somewhere between 400 to call it 7 or 800. Some men have higher if they're really, really strong and muscular and they're really working out. Their numbers might be higher.
I think George is on the upper end of that 700 mark.
Probably, you know, you're
Probably.
Yeah.
I would
probably.
agree.
I mean, why not? Why wouldn't I be? Women range from 4 to 120, with an average, if you take the average of that, put it at like 60. Even if Kim was like just pumping her testosterone replacement therapy, in menopause, right? Hypothetically, and you're at 120 versus 700. Just think about that for a moment. Huge difference. So my invitation in that is just to think about these numbers, and granted, different doctors will say different numbers. So, if you're listening out there and you're like, Jenny's got her numbers wrong, it's about right. And the idea is the differentiation in these numbers, because testosterone is the sex drive hormone that makes our arousal accessible. It doesn't mean arousal is elusive for women or lower testosterone people. It just means it takes a little longer for it to kick into gear. We need a lot more stimulation. We need a lot more flirting. We need a lot more to kick it into gear than the accessibility that testosterone allows for. Testosterone's like the gas fireplace. On, good, we're here, let's get moving. Right? A lower testosterone number, or women, are typically the wood fireplace. Go chop the wood. Now bring it in. Make the kindling. Build the fire.
Honey, you know how to build a fire.
Right? You got a lot going on there. And then now, if we both have a fire going, we both have a fire going. But to get to the level where we both have a fire going, we have to be understanding of the lived experience of our different bodies. And so that's an important piece in terms of cultivating enough foreplay, emotionally and sensually, before we even get sexual. Right? So that's a key piece. When I say 20 minutes, like really 20 minutes, like the neck. Use the neck, use the ears, use the lips, do an inner thigh, come back to the neck. Don't even touch the genitals for 20 minutes. Make the genitals throb and want it, and then go there. Now, men are different because the accessibility of testosterone and arousal. Men like to jump right to the genitals. That's what they do when they self-pleasure. It's like, oh, grab my lube, go. Or if they have a foreskin, go. Right? Like that's an easier go-to. And so that's a difference in lived experience. When you're, kissing in bed, moving to the genitals more quickly for a man is usually okay than it is for a woman. And so that's the difference in terms of testosterone and genital speed. And what we end up doing to our partner is what our own body wants. So it's actually thinking about what the other body needs.
Well, I'm gonna be I'd really like to get George's take on this, and I really appreciate you listening to Modern Pleasure today. We've got my husband George on. He's helping to dissect the mismatched libido conversation here with me and Dr. Schuyler. But I do want to thank our sponsor, Adam and Eve, and George, you'll appreciate this. Adam and Eve is giving you free stuff. If you go to adamandeve.com and you use code word modern, you're going to get 50% off any item, almost any item, but they're also going to give you 3 free sexy bonus gifts, and free 6 movies. Free, free, free if you use the code word modern at checkout. Again, that's adamandeve.com. Go find yourself something fun, something pleasurable at a bargain right now just for listening, and get 50% off plus free shipping when you use the code word promo code modern. And I would like to add that Dr. Schuyler does do a lot with Adam and Eve, and wondering what, if any, you would recommend in terms of items that could help stimulate libido, if you will. I mean, is there, I know we like to use toys. It looks like we lost George. We
Oh,
like to use toys, but is our toys uh something that, like George, sometimes when I'm not aroused or in the mood, he gets my little bullet out, and that definitely will do it. So, eh, talk a little bit about that, if you will, while we're uh, on the subject of 50% off and and free stuff from
sure. And waiting for
adamandeve.com.
George to come back because I want to hear what George has to say about everything we just spoke to. Um, honestly, I love any toy that functions as, let's call it like a threesome modality, right? So if you have a favorite toy that brings a lot of arousal to you, why not throw that into your foreplay or into whatever type of sex you're having? And so some people, people ambiance is really important, so they'll buy certain furniture, like Adam and Eve sells like a liberator ramp, and that's really comfortable, especially if your body doesn't want just like the bed and it's not as comfortable that way. Our bodies age or we have certain abilities or disabilities in our body, and so having furniture, certain ways to sort of prop up the body to be more comfortable is really
Oh,
helpful.
that
Yeah,
is.
and also if you have mismatched heights, right? So that can be really helpful to sort of prop the hips up a little more. Um, yeah, like, it's great to play with furniture that way. I love any toys. I have a lot of people who love the rabbit and they'll have a fantastic playful time with their partner. And then maybe the orgasm is a little more elusive, but they'll use the rabbit after sex while the partner is sort of kissing on their breasts or their neck. And then they'll have an orgasm that way, or they'll have another, maybe they have an orgasm with their partner, but they want like 3 more with the rabbit. So, that would be a fun toy to throw into the mix. I'm a fan of throwing anything into the mix that sort of helps facilitate more fun and pleasure. And, my MO on going shopping is like you would with any sort of pair of shoes, like what appeals to you? What are you attracted to? And try it out. And, again, like with a 50% discount and free shipping, yeah, might as well like build out a box. And if you make a mistake and buy a toy that you don't love, oh well, it was 50% off. Who cares?
George is shaking his head. Yes. Yeah, I'll take that 50% off plus a lot of
Check out.
fun free stuff. That's
Yeah.
adamandeve.com, code word modern, MODERN. Grab your free sexy stuff and some movies and that 50% off plus free shipping. I was telling Dr. Schuyler, Georgia skipped off a little bit for a minute, but that we do like to use toys in the bedroom. George loves them. And I know a lot of men are not exactly thrilled with toys in the bedroom for whatever reason. But my husband likes them, and thank goodness he does, because he just wants me to be pleasured in any way, shape, or form, even if it doesn't come directly from him. I'm a lucky girl.
But it's him using it with you, even though this look, you can have George's fingers, tongue, penis, or he can facilitate just being present with you and attuned while the rabbit or whatever toy gives you some bullet gives you sensation, right? You're not going to want a stranger. It's not like the toy. It's not like George has to feel inadequate because the sensation is from something else. It's him in the room with you that matters most.
Right, right. Yeah. Which I found really odd when I hear other women talk about, oh, yeah, they don't like it when I use when I use a toy, they feel, inadequate or something. I'm like, "Oh, that's unfortunate for
We're
sure."
missing out for sure.
So,
So
honey
oh,
oh,
go
go
ahead, Kim.
ahead, Dr. Tyler. No,
I was
I was
a little landed for George and almost follow up. What would make an ideal sex life with Kim? What would that look like for you
Um, what would that look like with me?
or feel like?
She had mentioned earlier. Oh, you had mentioned earlier about foreplay and all that kind of stuff. So what do you? So for example, what do you do when couples are so busy all the time? There's doesn't seem to have that time in advance to make that all kind of work.
That's where the sex dates come in, and that's
Oh,
where personal responsibility also comes in. And what I mean by that is if you have something on the calendar, let's call it I have a lot of couples who are, very busy, young kids, full-time jobs, and they'll find a time on the calendar that it works because maybe their kids are at the park with a babysitter or their kids are at school or, their kids are in bed. And, let's say it's 8 o'clock on a Thursday night, hypothetically. At 7 o'clock, what are you doing to get yourself in the mindset? Are you still on your screen doing your work
hmm.
or are you trying to close down? Are you playing music that you like that sort of gets you in the mood? Are you taking a bath or going for a walk and clearing your head? How are you approaching that scene? Are you listening to some erotica or reading it and kind of going, am I getting my juices flowing or just fantasizing? Right. So, how do you approach 8 o'clock with intention? How do you take responsibility for approaching 8 o'clock with intention? And, what do you want to put on that makes you feel comfortable and confident in you? Right?
Mhm.
And maybe that's a dress, and maybe that's a suit, and maybe that's a towel, and whatever it is. Maybe that's a nothing, you know? Do you play a game? Like this poker thing that you guys do is awesome. Do you at 8 o'clock, do you play poker for a little while just to kinda get your mindset and your playfulness there?
We've done that forever.
I
I know.
know.
You
Huh?
get so busy in life, and then all of a sudden, when there's busyness, foreplay I absolutely love, but it just seems like in our life, it's just our life is so busy that kind of gets out of the way and moves on, and then we're out of there.
But George, I also think that in my opinion, I think your definition of foreplay is different than my definition of foreplay.
Foreplay, guys, is in my book, is not just 8 to 8:20 on your sex date night. It's really important. That counts, that
Yeah.
matters, but foreplay are all the micro moments through the week that you put the deposits into those bank accounts, those little
Mm.
piggy banks, right? It's every single time you pass her and you kiss her neck and you keep walking. And same, Kim, it's every time you pass him and, rub his butt a little bit or take his goatee and give him a quick kiss and you keep moving, right? Those are the micro moments of like, I see you. I desire you, and now I'm gonna keep moving. It's
Mm.
also all the micro moments of emotional intimacy. How's your heart today? Right? When do we connect with each other? If you're not emotionally connecting through the week, 8 o'clock on whatever night is your sex date is not gonna work because 'cause you're not attuned to each other. Your hearts are living parallel lifestyles, and you don't know what's happening in the other person's world. So, having an emotional connection through the week is foreplay.
Yes, I agree, and I think that's kind of what was going on this weekend. George, I mean, you experienced something different with me that I think in my book is actually foreplay, that could have easily transitioned into sex that we didn't have.
That you might have. Wait a minute, what are you guys doing in 20 minutes when you're done the podcast? I mean,
Right, I know, I mean,
Anyone with
it's true.
orgasm today.
But I just wanna recognize that I mean, I'm recognizing it, I'm hoping and I think you do too, but you can see where just in those few days of having that, a little bit more affectionate, a little bit more flirting, a little bit more touching, a little bit more talking, could have really enhanced the actual, uh, sex that we have, I think it would have been a deeper connection on both levels, outside of the bedroom and inside of the bedroom, if you will. Do you see that? Can you
Yes,
visit?
most
Yeah,
definitely. Yes.
okay. Well, that's important. Good, I'm glad you can.
What you guys did not articulate, even though you put a lot of deposits into that emotional piggy bank and that playful piggy bank and in that, sensual piggy bank. And even though you haven't cashed out yet, what you did do is use a rain check. And I really support the rain check for couples, because if one or the other is not in a place to make sexual contact, again, if you force it, it's inauthentic and feels obligatory. And neither person wants that. But the rain check is, okay, well, maybe what we have is time to cuddle instead, and we'll follow up with each other another time. And the rain check is powerful because it still communicates connection, and it still communicates I desire you. And you asked about busy lives, George. You're busy sometimes. It doesn't always land well for each other. So again, I'm less interested in frequency and more in the connection and able to navigate the moments between sexual contact so that neither person is feeling empty, rejected, or disconnected.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I mean, I can really sense that moving forward, I think it'll be interesting to see how all of this stuff that I'm learning and that hopefully George is on the receiving end of translates into sex in the bedroom, Um, how I'm wondering if at all. I'm pretty sure it's going to be different for me, and for him too, because I think that connection. Listen, I know there were times in the beginning of our relationship and even throughout our relationship that we would have sex and go, wow, that was really amazing. And mostly it was because I was in it just as much as he was, as opposed to just, having sex. And so I this is where I wanna get back to. I wanna get back, if we're gonna have sex, damn it, I want it to be worth every minute. You know, I
What
I
do
I
I?
yeah, I don't wanna waste my energy just having sex. I wanna have that connection too. And I can see where, this is going to change for us in the bedroom. If we can continue down this path and be a little bit more mindful and thoughtful about the, 5 days of foreplay. I love that. I love that 5 days of foreplay thing, honey. I think we should just put that on the calendar, 5 days of foreplay that lead to Saturday morning. Or maybe even sooner, who knows?
It does. It does create some more spontaneous energy, when you have that. George, I'm curious to ask the question. I didn't want to leave the listeners without a response. What would, and just so Kim can hear, what would, I don't know what you would rate your sex life at, and maybe that feels too vulnerable to give it a 1 to 10 rating, but what would be a notch higher? Like, what could change? What can you take responsibility to change? What kind of requests could you ask him for? What would, sorry, I'm
Yeah.
moving my screen for the sun. What
Wow,
would change for you to make your sex life even better?
what would change for me? Like, what would I want, or what?
Yeah. What kind of change could you guys co-create to make it even better?
That's a good question.
Oh, come on. There's gotta be at least one thing.
Oh, come on. I don't know. That's a good question.
In the absence of an answer, my guess is that you don't actually struggle with your mismatched libidos then. Kim keeps saying she's the lower libido,
She
which,
does have a lower libido. Yes, there's no
okay.
doubt about that.
Do you struggle with the mismatch, or do you still feel love and desire and it works fine for you?
I struggle a little bit. I will say this weekend I felt really loved without having sex. I felt that there was a huge difference. I mean, with my wife, I think something that kind of got my attention is we were sitting down in the backyard, and all of a sudden, just out of the blue, my wife goes, "I wonder if we can do it on this." And I'm looking at her like, who? Now in my head, I'm saying, "Who are you?" Right? But outside, I'm thinking, "What do I do? What do I say? Where do I go with this?"
Yeah, we have these rockers on the deck, and I'm like, Or no, they were the poof
It's not
things.
really what it is. It's more
Yeah,
of
just the
the
fact
actual
that I
thought
actually
that
said that
and
I'm
said it
actually
out.
thinking that.
Yes.
Mhm.
Say that out loud was like, wow, she really is helping us.
Glad to hear.
I think if I'm going to speak for my husband because I'm pretty sure I know him fairly well. I think George would like to have, like, okay, George, forgive me, but I
Yeah,
did, I
there is no
did,
forgive you. I hate when that starts like
I
that.
know, I know, right? I did tell Dr. Schuyler about the fact that you keep putting that Kama Sutra book on my pillow or on my and open to certain positions that I know I can't get into anymore. And so I think I always felt like George's idea of sex was supposed to be this, crazy position or something that I just wasn't comfortable with. So I feel like if there was anything missing for him, it would be a little bit more adventure in terms of positions, more oral sex. Um, I think that and I think that is what is missing for him. Am I right, honey?
Yes, that's about right. Yeah.
Okay. See?
Mm. So
Thank
you might do well making a purchase of some furniture then, because it could help with certain positions. Like the Liberator rib could help bolster your hips up a little higher, which means, I don't know, like, there's a Kama Sutra position with your legs open straight up in the air. If I did a leg workout that day, forget about it. That's not happening. But if my hips are elevated enough, I could drape them over my husband's shoulders, and then I'm like, okay, that's less effort on my my
Yeah.
sore leg. Right, you could play with that a little bit. I find I don't know if you guys have sex with a full-length mirror in your room, but full-length mirrors are super fun, especially, like, if you're doing doggy style, right? Then, George, you can make eye contact with Kim in the
Huh.
mirror. Kim, you get to look at his chest, right, as he's holding your hips from behind. That's kind of a sexy way to do a traditional position. I don't know if doggy style is traditional for you guys or not, but a more generic position with, like, an exotic or erotic touch to it.
We have mirrors.
There bears. She's like, "I have a mirror."
Look at he's not saying anything.
you. Well, I did find out that our bed is the right height.
Oh, good. Yeah, we did have
And
that
then
conversation.
she comes in and she goes, "Oh yeah, our bed is the right height." I'm going, "What?" So
Right height
she's
for what?
For sex.
exactly.
It's important, I hear.
That's what
Height.
I was told.
Yeah, if some people like that sort of Japanese low bed thing, but that's hard for somebody to stand and play with the other partner because they usually have to kinda squat down. And if it's too tall of a bed for somebody short like me, then it's too tall of a bed. You gotta figure out your bed height.
Bed height is more important than the mattress.
Depends on your priorities.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, honey, I really appreciate you being vulnerable with us today and coming on. I know after our conversation on last week when I had to, reveal the conversation that Dr. Schuyler and I had, knowing that other people were going to be listening to this, he literally looked at me and went, "Oh man, you've got to be kidding." And I'm like, "Sorry, it had to be done." And so the fact that you're such a good sport about this, I really do appreciate, and I appreciate you coming on too. And I love you so much, and thank you. And check in with me in about
And
20
Kim,
minutes.
how many how many deposits into some emotional piggy bank does he get for showing up?
Oh boy, yeah, I'm gonna have to put quite a few in there. We'll fill it up.
Mhm.
Do you have any last questions for Dr. Schuyler before I let you
No,
go?
it's been interesting. It's
Yeah,
definitely
actually, why don't you just give us your take really quick? What can you sum up your experience today and just let us know?
extremely helpful. So when you did the numbers, and I'm a number person, it totally makes sense. Well, one person's up so high and the other one's down so low, and that's just how it is. And so it just makes it
In terms of the testosterone, you mean?
Correct. Easier
Yeah.
to understand for sure.
It just it lands. Then you have a lot more compassion and empathy for the other person's lived experience. And same, Kim, right? When you're like, "Oh my gosh, he's always so horny or such a high sex drive." Well, he's got huge numbers going on in him, especially being,
It's not my
vi
fault. I mean, it's not my fault.
It's not your fault.
But it's not your fault either.
Hard to say. But it does help us understand the other person's lived experience. You can be like, "Okay."
Most
Yeah.
definitely. I will say with males, because I know females like to talk and they talk to each other. I've never been in a group of men that have said, "Hey, what were you doing last night?" or "How was that?" or we just don't do that stuff. At least that I know of.
Yeah, women do like to talk.
Yes, they do.
Although, during our dinner party over the weekend, some of the guys were talking too, so
Some of the guys were definitely listening. They weren't saying a word, but man, they were definitely listening to because everybody has problems. And so I think if this helps somebody, I think it's perfect.
Yeah.
That's why.
I think
All
all
right.
humans like to talk when given the permission to do so.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Although
Mhm.
my husband was like, "I didn't give you permission to say that."
That's true.
All right, honey, I'm gonna let you go. Thank you so much, and
Well,
I'll,
thanks for having me.
Thanks for
thanks
being
for
here.
being here.
Bye bye.
Well, that was interesting.
Mhm. How was that for you?
Uh, I was a little bit nervous at first, and I know he was, but I was really nervous at first, and then I settled into the conversation, just fine, I think. I think we did I don't know.
Well,
I don't know if I wanna make a habit out of it, but, it was good. Oh, boy. Okay, so really quickly, because I know our time is about up, but, excited about next, episode. We're going to bring in, Savannah as a guest when we talk about permission for pleasure. And, Savannah is gonna be filling us in on some fun toys, which, by the way, you can get from Adam and Eve right now, just for listening. 50% off. Use the code word modern, MODERN. Who doesn't love free stuff? Free stuff is awesome because if you go on to adamandeve.com right now and use code modern at checkout, you're not only going to get your 50% off, but you're going to get free 6 free sexy items and three sexy items and 6 free spicy movies and free shipping as well. So make sure you head over to adamandeve.com, use code word modern at checkout. And next episode would probably be a really good one to use that code word on, because we're going to have some fun talking about some really fun products. But more importantly, and I have to admit that I think the one word that I have used more than anything when talking about this podcast to anybody who cares to listen, my friends or whoever, was that I gave myself permission to feel this way, and it was so freeing. So I'm assuming that that conversation, if you want to just give us a little tease, Dr. Schuyler, into what we might be learning next episode.
yeah, I mean, permission for pleasure is, gosh, I think it's summed up in that first episode when we talked, Kim, that pleasure is your birthright. And what we end up doing with social, religious, or family of origin messages is we go, my arousal is dangerous, or my desire is dangerous, or arousal can get too out of control, or my arousal means that I'm a bad girl or a bad boy, or I'm a slut or I'm a player. And then we pool all these terms and our sexuality into this sort of demeaning box and kind of keep it locked down tight
Mm-hmm.
versus saying, I'm allowed to bask in my pleasure. My pleasure is my birthright. And when I do so, I feel empowered in my sexuality, and it feels really good. And it feels really life giving, actually. And it doesn't have to be dangerous, right? Pleasure is not dangerous the way, a lot of religions oftentimes tell us it is, and sort of then
Mhm.
society says it is. Um,
Right. The narrative.
the narrative says it's dangerous versus like not dangerous, actually pretty life-giving.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So we are definitely going to get into that conversation next episode. So make sure that you join us. And don't forget, Modern Pleasure, you can download your Modern Pleasure podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you so much, Dr. Schuyler, for being here. And don't forget, adamandeve.com, use code word modern and find something that's going to put a little bit more pleasure into your life with 50% off, free shipping, and some other free stuff. We will see you next time on Modern Pleasure.